Hello, classic rock fans. I am here reporting a couple of days after seeing Bill Maher do a stand-up comedy show at the Riverside Theater as part of his WTF tour this year. I suppose before I talk about it at all, I better offer up a number of disclaimers about why I'm even making this video, given that Bill is not exactly a classic rock concert I'm reviewing. So while he's not a classic rock artist, I do like to talk about live shows that I've seen, even if it's not classic rock. In the past, I've covered, the Tina Turner musical, and I covered a different stand-up show a couple of years ago. I talked about seeing Al Franken do a stand-up show, and that was a really enjoyable night. So, you got to remember, from time to time on this channel, I'm going to talk about media and entertainment that's outside of the classic rock bubble. So that's number one. And also, frankly, this year has been kind of quiet for me with classic rock concerts. The last 2 years, I saw a lot of shows, so I was able to do a lot of reviews. But more important than that, I just got to see a lot of concerts and had a lot of fun. And unfortunately, this year, it's been a downtick. I've seen less shows than I'm used to. So that's actually part of what motivated me to go see this stand-up show, because I guess I wanted just to get out there and see some live entertainment. And finally, I should also point out that even though he's not a classic rock artist, Bill Maher does have some classic rock connections, at least through the shows and podcast he hosts. All through his shows, and with his current podcast, Bill has always included classic rock artists in a regular rotation of the guests he brings on. But even more than that would be his podcast Club Random, in which he's hosted several conversations, very revealing and interesting conversations with classic rock stars like Sammy Hagar, Gene Simmons, Daryl Hall. You might remember a couple of years ago on this channel, we covered Bill's interview with Daryl Hall actually quite a bit, because in that conversation, Daryl expressed a level of frustration of him being associated with John Oates, which of course was very perplexing to not just, me on this show, but Bill in that moment, and made for a funny moment.
I mean, you have a partner, so it's a little different than...
I don't have a partner.
You
think John Oates is my partner?
You still tour together, don't you?
Yeah, but he's not my partner.
Well,
he's my business partner.
Look what I've stumbled into here.
He's not my creative partner.
What's interesting about Daryl expressing that frustration is that it predates him basically breaking up the touring entity, Daryl Hall and John Oates, and then suing John Oates by about a year. So you saw a little bit of the tension in the interview, and then a year later, he's blown up their whole relationship. So that's interesting. That's the kind of stuff that makes me tune in to Bill's podcast, especially when he has a classic rock artist on as a guest. Now, all that said, I can't talk you into liking Bill Maher. If you don't like him for political reasons, yeah, I completely get that. In fact, if that's the case, I would recommend you just not watch the rest of this video. There's infinite content out there, and all I'm doing here is just reviewing a show. I am not trying to convert anybody. I'm not trying to convince you that he's funny. You already know if he's funny or not, because humor is subjective. If he's funny to you, then there's that. If he's not, yeah, click off. Watch something else. Don't waste your time with this. Let's talk about why I wanted to go see this show, because here's the thing. Bill has been touring for obviously years and years, and he has kept Milwaukee in his regular rotation of cities that he appears in, which I appreciate, by the way. Anytime an artist keeps a city or a town that's not one of the major metro centers, like a Chicago or a New York or LA, in the regular rotation, I appreciate that. I don't take anything for granted when it comes to live entertainment, because Milwaukee is often part of flyover country, and we get skipped by a lot of tours. There's a number of my favorite artists who I'm a little annoyed by because they don't make an effort to come to Milwaukee. So, I appreciate that Bill comes here quite often. I've had probably a dozen chances to see him in the last 15, 20 years. Now, if I'm a fan of his, why haven't I seen him before? Well, frankly, I don't see a lot of stand-up comedy right off the bat. I could tell you every stand-up show I went to in my whole life, and I'm pretty sure that's less than 10. A couple of highlights is, like I said, a couple years ago I saw Al Franken. A couple years before that, I saw Mark Maron and Dean Delray. That was actually in February 2020. That was the last live performance of anything I saw before, the pandemic hit. So that was a pretty memorable show. And very funny. I had a great time at that. I had seen Mark Maron once before, but I really went to see Dean Delray, who is a very funny comedian and also the, I think, best music podcaster out there. So, yeah, I go to see stand-up comedy from time to time, but not very often. So the reason I went to see Bill this time was twofold. One, I don't know if this is out there, beyond his podcast listeners, but on his podcast, he's been saying he's pretty much ready to stop touring altogether. He hasn't committed to it. He hasn't made it official, but he's saying tentatively this very well might be his last year doing regular touring, where maybe he'll just do his Vegas residencies that he likes doing, or again, go, stick to those major markets I mentioned earlier.
After this year, I'm going to stop doing it.
Really?
So, well, or I could go back. I don't want to make like a big announcement or something.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm doing a special at the end of the year.
Right.
It'll be my 13th for HBO. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I may go back to it, but certainly in 2025, I will not be on the road. I just want to see. I've been not done that in 40 years. I want to see what it's like.
Wow.
But one reason is like I'm just better than ever, and I sell half the tickets to guys who I don't think are half as good as me.
I might want to do some of these kind of things live. That's kind of an interesting option that people do nowadays.
Oh, right.
And then it's kind of an event.
So when I heard that, I realized this Milwaukee date may very well be the last time he's in town. And if that's the case, then yeah, because I'd like to say I saw him at least once. There's a couple of comedians that I would still like to see on stage that I haven't got a chance to yet. But Bill, I've had several chances to. So hearing that this Milwaukee date might be my last shot, realistically, I decided I wanted to go. Also, what really made me decide to buy the ticket was the day before his original stand-up date here, because the show I saw was a makeup date. The original date was actually set for the day after Donald Trump survived the assassination attempt this summer, which is crazy timing. So if you remember, obviously in Pennsylvania, Trump narrowly survives an assassination attempt. And by the way, thank God he did, okay? I've seen all the jokes out there. Shit would have gone so bad if that little freak had better aim. So thankfully he survived, and we didn't erupt into a civil war that day, So anyway, because it was the day before of Bill Maher's original Milwaukee date, in my mind, I was thinking like, oh, wow, we're going to get his initial reaction. We're going to get his first thoughts about this like historic event, and it could be very funny. More likely it would just be very interesting. So that was kind of the thing that made me decide, yeah, I definitely want to go to that show. So I bought the ticket that day. Now, shortly after buying the ticket, of course, Bill canceled the show, or at least postponed it. Now, he said it was because there was trouble with his plane. In fact, he even grabbed his pilot and made his pilot explain what was wrong with the plane to ensure that the reason Bill was not coming to Milwaukee was because of plane difficulties, not because of anything that had happened the day before with the assassination attempt. And sure, I believe it. I'm not going to get into conspiracy land about that. I will say it's probably a good thing that he canceled for that date after all, because the day after that was the start of the Republican National Convention, which was also held here in Milwaukee. And the logistics of getting downtown got very difficult very quickly. And there was already a lot of confusion about where you could park downtown because the Riverside isn't that far away from the security zones that were being set up. Now, the good news for me is that the Pabst Theater Group that owns the Riverside Theater did something that they normally don't do when there's like a cancellation or postponement. They sent me an email saying, we're sorry for this inconvenience. To make it up to you, we're offering 2 free tickets to either Asia or 10cc. And that's how I got to see Asia for free. If you saw my Asia concert review from a few months ago, that's how I got into that show for free. I had planned to go to that show anyway, but this made it very easy for me. So thanks to the Pabst Theater Group for doing that. I thought that actually really was a pro-fan, very friendly thing to do. I'm definitely one to criticize venues when they do things that I think are anti-fan. But to be fair, I absolutely want to give credit and express appreciation to venues when they do something very pro-fan. And that was awesome. So I appreciated that. Okay, so how about I talk about the show I went to see, right? Was that enough of a preamble? Good Lord. Okay, so yeah, went to the show. Didn't know what to expect because I haven't seen a lot of his stand-up before. I've seen his monologues on Real Time, but I haven't watched any of his previous specials. I've seen clips, so I kind of knew what his style was like, but it had been a while, admittedly, since I really watched any of that from his stand-up shows. So I wasn't sure how it was going to be. Bill's famous for being a pot smoker, so I sort of expected him to be kind of laid back and chill, and that was the first thing that I was wrong about. He was quite animated, and that's a good thing, by the way. He was enthusiastic. He was kind of pacing around the stage. He was telling his jokes almost rapid fire. And that's, I guess, the one big thing that surprised me was just the presentation of the jokes. And again, not a criticism. There was a lot of comedy. He went on for like an hour and a half, which I would say is longer than I expected. I expect most comedy shows to be, about an hour, maybe an hour and 15. He went an hour and a half, and he was not taking big breaks in between jokes either. Like, it was not a padded hour and a half. It was a very tight hour and a half where he was piling jokes upon jokes. So I thought that was pretty cool. It felt like bang for your buck. And, as is the case with any stand-up show, some jokes are funny and some are meh. And, there's even a few that might suck, So I would say most of the jokes were pretty good, I definitely laughed out loud more than once. I'm not going to repeat any of the jokes I heard. And nor did I record anything from that show, because another thing I should point out here is there was an announcement before he came on stage saying that if anyone was caught recording anything, they would be asked to leave immediately, and the SD card or their phone or whatever they recorded the material on would be confiscated. I don't know that they can even do that. And that does strike me as extreme, but it was enough where I thought, okay, I'm not even going to roll the dice with that. Comedians are very protective of their material from their live shows, and I understand that. So I wasn't really motivated to record anything to begin with. I was mildly interested to see if he would do any Milwaukee-specific comedy, maybe at the start of his show, because when I saw Al Franken a couple of years ago, he did. He riffed on our senator and a couple of other Wisconsin topics for a little bit, and that's fairly common for comedians. So I thought, considering that Bill's been here a whole bunch of times, maybe he'd have a couple of jokes, but he did not. Which, whatever, you're not entitled to those type of specified jokes, but, that would have been nice, I guess. But no, he went straight into his act, and yeah, it was rapid fire, And the audience liked it. I will say the audience was definitely engaged and laughing. There weren't any awkward silences. Thankfully, there weren't too many hecklers or any hecklers who were overly obnoxious. There was a moment where there was one person who heckled and shouted something like, "Speak for yourself," which was such an odd thing to shout out. Because Bill took the obvious response and he looked at the guy and he was just like, "Well, what do you think I'm doing?" That's the whole point of me being here. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm speaking for myself. And that got a really positive reaction from the crowd. And yeah, that was kind of funny because it was just like, of all the things to shout out for a heckle. And God, I fucking hate hecklers. That's probably part of the reason why I don't go to a lot of stand-up shows. Because even well-meaning audience members who shout out something in support of the comedian, I find that annoying. And when someone actually tries to engage and argue with the comedian or, disrupt, I mean, that's nails on a chalkboard grating. It ruins things totally. So if you see a comedian react badly to a heckler, and you think maybe it's overkill if they're tearing into him, I don't think so. I think a comedian's got to do whatever they can to shut that shit down, because heckling really does ruin a good time for pretty much everybody else in the audience. Now, when it comes to the crowd, I would say it very much skewed to an older demo, an older audience. Obviously, based on Bill's comedy, I would presume they're mostly liberal-leaning, left-leaning. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was a number of Republican-leaning or right-leaning people in the audience, because a major part of Bill's political commentary has been in reaction to woke news and woke ideologies, and he's been very critical of that world, which is, puts him kind of in the political center in modern times. Now, you still would have to be a Republican with a very good sense of humor about yourself and, that party, because Bill's harshest jokes were definitely at the MAGA and Republican world. But I would say the majority of his act was about what I would call woke news stories and that kind of social justice stuff that's in the news a lot. So this is how he structured the show. He opened with a lot of really good jokes about Trump and MAGA and Republicans. That got, again, his audience, a liberal-leaning audience, on his side early. And he warned the audience. He said something like, "I'm glad you're liking these jokes, but I'm coming after the liberals next," or something to that effect, kind of, showing his hand a little bit. And sure enough, that was true. I think if you clocked it out by minutes, the majority of his material was making fun of the political left, particularly the fringe left, the campus left, the social justice left, whatever you want to call it. Which is why he's kind of out of favor in that world. There's a lot of liberal-leaning people. In fact, in my social group, I have a lot of friends who fucking hate Bill's guts and gave me a hard time for going to see him, or laughed about me going to see him, And I'm not even saying they're wrong. I'm not going to really dive into my politics here because that's, not really important. I'm just going to say that a large part of his act was making fun of, again, that fringe left kind of stuff. The third and final act of the show was sort of a turn back to jokes about Trump world and Republicans. But the real end of the show, he got off politics altogether and made jokes that were much more universal. Jokes about relationships, jokes about marriage, and stuff like that, which I think was, more inclusive for everybody in the audience, and some of the biggest laughs were near the end of the show. So what I enjoyed about this is that, from a structural standpoint, Bill's built, if you will, a very good set. Starts off with jokes about Trump and MAGA world to get his liberal-leaning audience on his side. They hang with him through his jokes and points about the campus left and the, the woke world that he is not a fan of. And the audience, I think, for the most part, rolls with him because maybe internally they're a little unsure about that world too. And then if he's lost anybody in that time, he brings them back with some more, Trump Republican jokes near the end. And then he kind of closes out on more universal stuff, again, like marriage and relationships and whatever else. So, yeah, I mean, that's the mark of a stand-up comedian who's been doing this work for decades. And, hey, the guy's a pro. What can I say? So I just appreciate that because, again, this is a ticket I spent money for. And it's important to me to know that whoever's doing the show put effort in. If you want to know if the show is going to be funny or not, then watch a couple of clips from his podcast, watch a couple of clips from Real Time, watch some of his monologues. If you enjoy that material, then you're probably going to enjoy what he does on stage because it's all very closely related. If you don't like what you see on his podcast or in his monologues, then of course do not go see it. Frankly, if you're not a Bill Maher fan and you're at this point in the video, I'm wondering why you're wasting your time with this. Because like I said, I can't talk you into liking him. I'll just say I had a good time. And I would recommend checking out his podcast if you're a classic rock fan, specifically the classic rock star interviews that he's done. Again, off the top of my head, he's talked to Gene Simmons, Sammy Hagar, Daryl Hall. Like, he's had some really good guests. And then I guess if you're wondering about this book here in the background, this is called True Story, which is a book he wrote, I think, back in the 90s. It's a novel, and it's about being a stand-up comedian during the stand-up boom of the 80s and 90s, which is the scene he came out of. I haven't read it, but it sounds very interesting, and I might read that next year. Bill's got a new book out, so I'm sure he'd prefer if I plugged that, but I'm not going to read that book, so fuck it. I'll plug this one instead, because this seems more interesting. It's not a polemic. It's not about politics. It's about the stand-up boom of the 80s and that stand-up comedy scene that he came out of, which is very different than what it is today. So I'm very curious about reading that. I'm sure that's going to be a lot of fun. But with that, I will just say thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you very much for not posting a shitty comment about either me or Bill in the comments below. If you're not a fan of really either one of us, I don't know what you're doing here. So please keep it civil and decent in the comments below. I know he's a controversial figure. I know just the mention of his name stirs up some emotions. I get that. Not here to defend that, but I would just ask that if you're going to say something in the comments, please be civil. I'm trying to keep a positive, civil environment on this channel. So let's be cool in the comments. If you have criticisms, that's fine, but don't go into the gutter with it. Otherwise, if you want to see me talk about other live performance reviews, like I said, I talked about seeing an Al Franken stand-up show a couple of years ago. And if you're a classic rock fan, I guarantee I have talked about a concert from an artist or band that you're a fan of. So please check out those concert reviews. And if you are that fan of classic rock and you're not familiar, I do a podcast about classic rock, and you might want to check that out too. We've had a lot of great guests on this year, and we have some very cool stuff on the horizon, so please check that out. Otherwise, thank you again so much for watching. Go see Bill Maher if he's right for you, and keep rocking.